Tomorrow morning, 75 million Americans on the East Coast wake up, and their cities are already gone. New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Miami, all sitting 5 meters lower than they were yesterday, permanently underwater. There was no hurricane, no storm surge, and no gradual warning from climate scientists. Just a sudden, violent geological shift that created a new shoreline instantly. The Atlantic Ocean has rushed in to fill the void, swallowing the political, financial, and cultural capitals of the United States in a single night. This is not a drill. It is not a movie. It is a hypothetical scenario of total coastal collapse. Let's see how fast the United States can survive losing its entire Atlantic coast, and whether the nation that remains could ever recover from the shock. To understand the sheer scale of this catastrophe, we first have to understand what a 5-meter drop actually looks like. We aren't talking about a few inches of water in the basement. 5 meters is 16 feet. That is the height of a standard single-story commercial building. It is enough to completely submerge the first floor of every structure from Maine to Key West. If this happened at night, millions would drown in their beds before they even understood what was happening. If it happened during the day, the panic would be immediate and absolute. We are exploring the science of sudden tectonic subsidence, the vanishing of America's most iconic cities, the largest refugee crisis in human history, and the total collapse of the global economy. This is what happens when the map is redrawn in an instant. Geologically speaking, land subsidence usually happens over millennia, or perhaps inches per year due to groundwater extraction. But in our scenario, we are imagining a massive, rapid tectonic failure along the continental shelf. A shelf collapse that drops the coastal plate vertically. When the land drops 5 meters, the ocean doesn't just rise. It behaves like a tsunami that never recedes. The Atlantic Ocean would immediately rush inland to find its new level. This inrushing water would carry the force of a freight train, smashing through glass, crumbling brick, and sweeping cars away like toys. But the water itself is only the first killer. The immediate secondary effect is the infrastructure collapse. As the salt water hits the power substations, transformers across the eastern seaboard would explode. The grid would go dark instantly. Underground gas lines, severed by the shifting earth and the pressure of the water, would rupture, causing fires to burn on top of the floodwaters. Sewer systems would back up instantly, contaminating the floodwater with toxic sludge. In a matter of minutes, the environment would turn from a modern urban landscape into a toxic, electrified swamp. There is no calling 911 because the cell towers are down. And even if they weren't, the emergency response centers are likely underwater themselves. The first hour isn't about rescue, it's about pure, chaotic survival. Now, let's tour the ruins. The devastation varies by city, but the result is the same. Total loss of function. New York City faces the most complex disaster. Manhattan is an island, and its lifeblood is underground. The subway system, a labyrinth of tunnels crucial to the city's existence, becomes a permanent saltwater reef in minutes. The seawater pours into the tunnels with such force that the air pressure inside could blow out manhole covers blocks away. Wall Street, located at the southern tip of Manhattan and sitting at low elevation, is gone. The New York Stock Exchange, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, all submerged. The skyscrapers might still be standing, but their lobbies are underwater, their foundations are being scoured by tides, and they are now isolated islands in a new archipelago. Move south to Washington, D.C. The capital was built on a swamp, and gravity remembers that. With a 5-meter drop, the Potomac River reclaims the National Mall. The Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial are flooded. The White House and the Capitol building, sitting on slightly higher ground, might survive as islands, but they would be cut off from the world. The Pentagon, the nerve center of the world's most powerful military, would face catastrophic flooding on its lower levels, destroying servers, communication hubs, and sensitive intelligence. The federal government is effectively decapitated. And then there is Miami. In this scenario, Florida faces the worst outcome. The average elevation of Miami is barely above the current sea level. A 5-meter drop deletes Miami from the map entirely. It doesn't just flood, it becomes part of the ocean floor. The entire southern peninsula of Florida disappears, turning Orlando into a beachfront property. There is no rebuilding Miami because there is no land left to build on. It is simply gone. If you survive the water, you now face the reality of displacement. We are talking about 75 million people, nearly a quarter of the U.S. population, suddenly homeless. This triggers the Great American Migration, a humanitarian crisis that dwarfs anything in recorded history. In the first 48 hours, the highways leading west, Interstate 80, Interstate 70, Interstate 40, become the scenes of the world's largest traffic jams. Millions of cars, desperate to escape the disaster zone, clog the roads. Gas stations run dry within hours. When the cars run out of fuel, people abandon them and start walking. This creates a logistical nightmare for the inland states. Where do 75 million people sleep? Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and the Carolinas do not have the infrastructure to absorb a population the size of the United Kingdom overnight. High school gymnasiums, churches, and stadiums would fill up instantly. Food supplies in the interior of the country would vanish as the supply chain breaks. We would likely see martial law declared almost immediately. The National Guard would be deployed not just for rescue, but to maintain order as hungry, terrified refugees overwhelm small towns in the Midwest. Water scarcity becomes a life or death issue. Disease outbreaks, cholera, dysentery, would begin to spread in the makeshift refugee camps along the Appalachian Mountains. The social fabric of the United States would be stretched to its breaking point as the haves in the safe zones clash with the have-nots fleeing the coast. While the humanitarian crisis unfolds, the economic clock stops ticking. The East Coast accounts for a massive percentage of the U.S. GDP. When New York City goes underwater, trillions of dollars in wealth are wiped out. We aren't just talking about real estate. We are talking about the servers that manage the global financial system. Banking data, stock records, insurance policies. If the physical servers are destroyed or the power is cut, the global markets freeze. Insurance companies would declare bankruptcy immediately. There's not enough money in the entire world to insure the loss of the entire East Coast. The dollar would crash. Without the port of New York and New Jersey, the port of Virginia, and the port of Savannah, international trade comes to a halt. The U.S. cannot export its goods, and it cannot import vital supplies. Globally, the shockwaves would be instant. Allies who rely on the U.S. military for protection would suddenly find themselves alone as the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet is crippled, its ports destroyed, and its command structure in chaos. Rivals might seize this moment of weakness to redraw global borders. The Pax Americana ends not with a war, but with a geological whimper. The United States would survive as a nation, but it would be a poorer, a smaller, and more humble country, focused entirely on rebuilding its interior, while the ruins of its greatest cities slowly rust beneath the waves. This scenario is, thankfully, geologically impossible in our lifetime. But it serves as a terrifying reminder of how fragile our civilization really is. We build our greatest monuments and our most vital engines of commerce right on the water's edge, betting everything that the ocean will stay where it belongs. But if the map ever did change overnight, the America that woke up the next morning would be unrecognizable. Which consequence do you think would be the hardest to recover from? The economic collapse or the refugee crisis? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this thought experiment, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the impossible. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.